She was steps away from her car when someone decided she would never make it home, and for 39 years, no one knew who did it. But before we proceed, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. Drop your location in the comments. We want to know where you're listening from. This is Silence After the Screams, your weekly dose of spine-chilling true crime. Like and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. And the story begins. It began with violence so sudden and so brutal that the world around it kept moving as if nothing had happened, as if a life had not just been torn apart in a place meant for safety, light, and noise. A teenage girl walked across a mall parking lot believing she was seconds away from home, believing the worst danger she faced that night was the cold air biting at her skin, believing that the headlights passing by belonged to strangers who would never notice her. She was wrong. Someone was already watching. Someone had been waiting. And by the time she realized she was not alone, the distance between her car and safety no longer mattered. The attack came without warning, without mercy, and without a single chance to escape, turning an ordinary walk into a nightmare that unfolded in full silence, beneath the glow of parking lot lights that never flickered and never dimmed. There were no screams loud enough to stop it, no hands reaching in time, no justice waiting at the end of the pavement. Only fear, pain, and a body left behind as if it were nothing more than debris. This was not a dark alley. This was not a hidden corner of the city. This was a shopping mall, surrounded by cars, storefronts, and families who had walked the same ground hours earlier without ever imagining that violence could grow here unnoticed. The parking lot stretched wide and open, painted with white lines and illuminated by tall lights that promised visibility and safety, yet somehow became the stage for something unspeakable. When she was found, there was no confusion about what had happened. The wounds told the story clearly. They spoke of rage, of force, of an attacker who did not hesitate and did not stop. And the most disturbing part was not how violent it was how fast it ended. A passerby noticed something lying where it did not belong. At first, it looked like discarded clothing. Then the shape became clear. Then the truth hit with a force that left witnesses shaking, unable to understand how such a thing could exist in a place so familiar. Police arrived to a scene that silenced even the most experienced officers. The brutality was undeniable. This was not an accident. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was deliberate. And whoever did this had vanished into the night without leaving behind a name, a face, or a single clear answer. Detectives moved quickly because they had to. Every minute that passed meant evidence fading, memories blurring, and a killer slipping further away. They canvassed them all. They questioned employees. They checked every camera, every angle, every grainy frame that might show a shadow moving where it shouldn't have been. But the parking lot gave them nothing. No clear witness, no usable footage, no license plate. Just a crime so violent it should have screamed for attention, yet somehow happened in near total isolation. It was as if the attacker had stepped out of nowhere and returned to nowhere just as easily. While police searched for answers, a family learned the kind of truth no one is ever prepared to hear. A daughter was gone. A sister was gone. A future that had not even begun was erased in minutes. There were no last words. No chance to say goodbye. Only questions that would never stop forming and pain that would never fully leave. They wanted justice. They needed answers. But all investigators could offer was silence and the growing realization that this case was already slipping away. As days turned into weeks, one thought began to haunt everyone involved. What if the killer was not a stranger passing through? What if he was someone who blended in so well that he walked past police, reporters, and grieving families without raising suspicion? What if he had already returned to the same mall, the same parking lot, the same ordinary life, carrying a secret no one could see? Because nothing about this crime felt random, nothing about it felt impulsive, and nothing about the wounds suggested hesitation. Leads dried up, Witness statements contradicted each other. Time worked against the truth with quiet efficiency. The mall reopened. Cars filled the parking lot again. Life continued, stepping over the memory of what had happened without ever stopping long enough to confront it. And somewhere out there, the person responsible kept breathing free air, untouched, unquestioned, unpunished. The worst injustice did not end in the parking lot. It stretched forward in time, quietly and relentlessly, turning grief into routine and failure into normalcy. Days passed without answers, then weeks, then years. And with every unanswered question, the truth sank deeper into the ground. Detectives chased shadows that led nowhere. They reviewed witness statements that contradicted each other, descriptions that changed with time, and memories that softened until they meant nothing at all. One person remembered a man standing near a car. Another remembered footsteps running. Another remembered nothing. The parking lot cameras failed them. Angles were wrong. Faces blurred. Critical moments slipped between frames. What should have been clear became unusable. What should have been obvious became uncertain. And uncertainty is where killers hide best. Investigators believed the attack was personal, but they could not explain why. There was no robbery, no struggle beforehand, no connection uncovered between the victim and any known suspect. The violence suggested rage, yet there was no argument heard. No confrontation witnessed. It was as if the attacker carried something dark long before that night and chose that moment to release it. But without a name, without a face, the theory meant nothing. A monster without an identity is impossible to haunt. Eventually, the case was pushed aside, not because it was solved, but because it resisted every attempt to be understood. Files were boxed. Evidence was sealed. The crime became a number, a date, a tragedy referenced quietly during meetings and then forgotten. As new cases demanded attention, the family never stopped asking questions, but the answers never came. And slowly, painfully, the world accepted that this was one of those crimes that would never be solved. While the victim's family lived in grief, the person responsible lived in freedom. He woke up each morning. He went to work. He blended into crowds. No one pointed at him. No one suspected him. No one knew. And that knowledge, that he could exist untouched by consequence, became its own kind of horror. Because if he could do this once and disappear, there was nothing stopping him from doing it again, except time. And time does not punish the guilty. It protects them. 39 years went by. An entire generation grew up without knowing what happened in that parking lot. The mall changed. Stores closed. New ones opened. Fresh paint covered old stains. But the violence never truly left. It stayed locked inside records and memories, waiting for something to disturb it. And then, without warning, someone did. Advances in forensic science reopened doors that had once been sealed shut. Evidence thought useless was examined again with new eyes. What once looked like nothing now looked like something. A single detail, overlooked decades earlier, suddenly mattered. And with it came a realization that sent shockwaves through the investigation. The killer had not been invisible. He had been missed. As detectives dug deeper, they found a pattern that made their stomachs turn. The violence was not isolated. It was not impulsive. It fit something larger, something intentional. And that meant the person responsible had been carrying this secret for decades, watching the world move on while he remained untouched, free, close, and far more ordinary than anyone expected. When the case was reopened, it did not feel like hope. It felt like an accusation against time, against the system, against every moment that allowed a killer to remain free. The evidence had been there all along. It just had not been seen. Boxes were pulled from storage, their edges worn down by decades of neglect. Inside them were photographs no one wanted to look at again, reports written by hands long retired, and fragments of a story that had never been finished. Detectives moved slowly, carefully, because every detail now carried weight. What once felt random began to form a shape, and that shape was horrifyingly consistent. One overlooked detail refused to stay silent. It didn't scream for attention. It didn't announce itself as important. But once it was noticed, it could not be unseen. It tied the crime scene to a presence that had been dismissed decades earlier. Someone who should have been questioned more closely. Someone who had passed through the investigation without leaving a mark. Not because he was invisible, but because no one expected him. As detectives followed this new path, they uncovered a life that had continued uninterrupted. A job, relationships, a routine that blended seamlessly into society. This person had not run. He had not hidden. He had simply kept going. And the thought that he had lived freely, while a family mourned without, answers made the injustice unbearable. When investigators finally connected the last thread, there was no celebration, only silence, because what they realized next was far worse than the crime itself. The truth had been close for years, close enough to touch, and yet it had been missed again and again. Decades of delay meant memories were gone, witnesses were dead, evidence had deteriorated, and justice, once delayed, had become something fragile and uncertain. Even if the truth came out now, it could never undo the years of freedom, the years of silence, the years stolen from the victim and her family. As detectives prepared to move forward, one question hung over everything. Not who did this, but why it took so long, and whether justice delayed, for nearly 4 decades, could still be called justice at all. Because some crimes do not fade with time. They wait. They grow heavier. And when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't bring relief. It brings a reckoning. The case was no longer just about a murder. It was about a failure so complete that it allowed violence to disappear into ordinary life. And the most unsettling truth of all was this. The killer was never gone. He was never hiding in the shadows. He was closer than anyone ever imagined. And when investigators finally stood face to face with the truth, they realized something that made their blood run cold. The answer had been there since the very first night. If you get to this point, please like and subscribe.